I never thought of it as being a publisher. I actually, when I was a little, I just wrote a lot. So I designed my own role-playing game called Mental Powers and Machine Guns. And it was like, I played a lot with G.I. Joe. I mean, I was like 10 or 11 when I started writing all this stuff.
Right.
So it was kind of like just G.I. Joe. You role-played these kind of super soldiers who had like psionic powers. And so me and my brother and the neighborhood kids, we played Mental Powers and Machine Guns for several years. And I had like an ongoing campaign. And looking back on it, a lot of it is just derived from D&D. I was like a kid and sort of copying D&D and putting on my own stuff. But I did that for years. Then my brother and I got really into Warhammer 40,000, and we would make up rules for all sorts of stuff. But other miniatures on the market, we did all sorts of variant rules. We had reams of material. So I never thought of it as being a publisher. I just was constantly producing material. Right. And then there came a time down the road when sort of the publishing happened naturally because I had all this material to publish.
Wow.
So I actually published my first product when I was 17, and it wasn't Goodman Games. It was that was when I was really into Warhammer 40,000. And there was another magazine out there. There's White Dwarf, of course, and then there's a magazine called Inquisitor, which is published out of the West Coast, and it was the 40K, I guess, indie magazine at the time. And my brother and I had, just reams of material from all these 40K games that we played over the years. And so I submitted some of my stuff to Inquisitor, and they came back to me with this, let's just say, a less than satisfactory offer. I was like 16 or 17 at the time this happened, and their offer was I wouldn't get paid anything, they'd get to keep all rights perpetually, and I'd get one copy of the published manuscript or published magazine. Wow. I was like, that's not very good. I'm getting like nothing out of this deal, and I'm giving you all rights to my product. So I was like, well, shoot, if they can do that, I can do that. Because I'd been taking like graphic design classes in high school and stuff. So my brother and I basically designed a magazine called The Dark Library and self-published it. I remember my print run cost $200 at like the Minuteman Press, like in downtown Atlanta. Like we did everything just locally. And I still remember there's a local game store called Sword of the Phoenix Games, which is now gone. But the owner, Dan Ackerman, I was like a little kid, and I came into a store with no credentials, nothing, except I'd been shopping there since I was like 9. And I was like, hey, I'm starting a magazine, will you take out an ad in my magazine? And so he actually paid me $25 for a quarter-page ad in the first issue of my magazine. It was cool. Like, it was just like my first sort of business experience and my first exposure to the industry. And so I printed up, I think, 100 copies or 200 copies, then tried to sell them. I didn't know anything about distribution, had no idea what I was doing, but over the course of time, just learned it all through that magazine. So that magazine was actually my first gaming business. You have to realize that in business, you're making decisions about what produces money, not what produces internal satisfaction. So if your company's going to survive, your company has to produce revenue. And you have many companies out there where the owner designs something, loves it, and just won't face the fact that it won't sell, or there's not a large enough base of support to support a company. So actually one of the earlier decisions I made at Goodman Games was to kill Bronchosaurus Rex, which was my first product, which I was the single sole author of.
I saw that.
Yeah, it was cool. It did really well initially, but it's a novel concept that's not enough to build a company around. It's good for a couple products.
Right.
So I did that and moved on to something else. And there's a lot of folks who instead would have kept trying to support this thing that really shouldn't have been supported.
Right.
Publishers have to stay in business, and to stay in business you have to make money. What I think a lot of fans don't realize is you can have a choice of what kind of product you get. You can have well-developed professional product where people are paid to do this for a living. Or you can have very amateur product where people do something else for 40 hours a week and try to squeeze in time on the side to do this.
Right.
And you can have a range in between. But for the most part, if you want product that's full color and beautiful, or if you want adventures that are well designed and aren't going to kill you off in the first encounter, if you want those things, you need to have people have the time to develop those adventures and actually focus on it. Those companies have to make enough money so that people can pay their rent and buy food for their family and yeah, whatever it might be. I mean, it's amazing the attitude of I should get it free, which is pervasive in a lot of places, and you see it down the internet everywhere. People, when people download stuff from basically BitTorrent sites and illegally download PDFs and whatever it may be, they don't actually think that if they do that enough, some guy somewhere is going to lose his job and not produce these niche products anymore. It's one thing for Hollywood where there's a vast, vast revenue base. It's another thing for a smaller publisher where you focus on a very niche thing, and for every dime that doesn't go towards, not necessarily me, but one of these small publishers, could be me, somebody's getting paid a little less up the value chain. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is you might not want to pay that $20, but if you don't pay that $20, the next product you get might not be nearly as nice. And so you got to balance that sort of situation.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, times are tough. People don't necessarily want to spend money. I mean, especially in this economy. So, and that's where some companies probably will fade away as there's none of customers buying their stuff. But it's tough all around.
Great.
The whole ramp up to 4th edition caused a lot of heartache for everybody. One of the things that I really like is that they're targeting a new generation. I mean, there's a lot of gamers who are very, very, very upset about this. But at the same time, as a profession, we have to decide if we're going to market and be like the hobby railroad industry, which is basically marketing to a smaller and smaller pool of people who are slowly aging and dying off, or if you want to market to the people who keep coming up, the folks who are now 13 and ready to play a game, and then in 3 years there's another group of people who are now 13 and ready to play a game. And if you choose to market in a way that constantly appeals to a constantly growing new sort of self-generating audience, in the long term you do a lot better and you survive a lot longer. So that's the goal of 4th edition, and I fully support that goal. Anybody who has any sort of long-term thinking in their head about how this hobby should evolve has to be thinking about how do we get more new people into the hobby. Right. On the flip side, 4th edition is actually part of the rules. You got to read about 800 pages worth of material. I mean, they're 3 fat hardbacks. And especially I've been doing some gaming with kids lately, and it's opened my eyes even more to the fact that, I mean, even as an adult, you got to spend a good chunk of time to read all that, and there's no way a lot of kids can read that. So what I really feel like about 4th edition is they did the right thing in terms of how they're targeting these kids. I think what we need to have now is, I don't know if it's 4th edition light or 4th edition a different
Something
game or
faster
basic or, yeah, I mean, you look back at D&D for the early era, all you needed was a 64-page book. And that was pretty much it. And then there's a bunch of adventures that went with it, and like geomorphs and things like that.
Right.
Yeah, but it was very, very, I mean, I remember my first experience with D&D, the players only had to read like 8 pages in that red book. All your races and classes, you could like flip through it, then you go to the equipment page and like you're done. It was very fast and easy, and you could just play in one afternoon. We got to get back to that somehow so we can really pull in a whole new generation. A lot of the concepts are very similar. If you get kids so they understand, levels and hit points and armor class, they'll easily make the translation to the more advanced game when they get to it. I've been thinking about this a lot. It's just something that's on my mind in terms of how we get new customers. It was like sort of an 18-month stretch there where it was like, wow, this industry has officially passed into a new generation, where a lot of folks passed away. And it's tough in a lot of ways because you don't want, just as a businessman, anytime you have any kind of, so here's some random parallels, like Ultimate Fighting Championship. I happen to be a fan of that. And so, it started out as like this really small, tiny sport that eventually got made illegal in almost every state and almost went bankrupt and almost died and then came back from the ashes, and now it's huge. It's the fastest growing sport in America. So if you approach Ultimate Fighting the way a lot of people think we should approach gaming, what Ultimate Fighting would do is stop trying to recruit new customers and only focus on the people who already know about it, cease all marketing, and slowly narrow its customer base until it's marketing only to itself. So that's the attitude a lot of people have about gaming, that what was good in any given year is what we should stay at, never evolve, and hold tight to. And so that would mean that what Ultimate Fighting should do is what they did back in the early 90s, which got them banned almost everywhere, which was extremely bloody, no rules whatsoever, that we should stick with that, because that's what's nostalgic and that's what's cool about it, and I really loved it, and it was the purest form of the sport, and so on.
Right.
But no, there's a reason it had to evolve. Aside from the whole John McCain, taking it down and it being made illegal, there were lots of sportsmanship reasons it had to evolve. You don't have 400-pound guys fighting 150-pound guys. That's just not fair, Like, there's just all these other reasons as well. But I think within gaming, people look at that trajectory. Gaming, D&D was huge. It exploded in a huge way, and people think that for some reason we should retain the purest form of it. And you definitely should. There's always that niche market that will adhere to the first edition rules, but times change, and times have to evolve for any sport or any game or any pastime to evolve. So circling this back to Gary, to me, this is the sign of we are changing times. It is officially a new era, and what worked in Gary's era definitely worked in Gary's era. That doesn't mean it works now. And the fact that that sort of pioneer generation has passed on should be even more reason to open our eyes and say, how do we make this activity accessible to people of this generation? D&D 4th edition, a lot of people hate it because it's different from what they loved, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, people don't like change, and if you and I, as we get older, we're going to be like everybody else talking about the good old days, and what we remembered, and I'm sure we're going to talk about like CDs, and our kids are going to have no idea what a CD is, because it's going to be all electronic and digital music in 10 years and so on. But at the same time, we got to recognize that you want things to keep moving. We don't want to be stuck in, when you talk to old men and they talk about, World War I or whatever was important to them, and you're like, whatever, Grandpa.
Right.
You don't want your kids to say whatever about D&D. You want them to look at D&D 4th edition and say, I actually know what this is. I never read anything. Everything I know came from movies and video games, so I can connect to this. I get what they're trying to do with this. Maybe it's still 800 pages, and we need to work on that, but at least they're making an effort.